Wie geht's? Welcome to this international edition of Wie geht's, a podcast of conversations with people working in the arts, cultural policy and the creative sector, reflecting on how the current crises affect the cultural sphere. My name is Martin Zierold, Director of the Institute for Arts and Media Management at the University of Music and Performing Arts in Hamburg, Germany, which is producing this podcast. The title of this podcast, Wie geht's, has a double meaning in German. It translates as, how are you? We want to know how people in the cultural realm are doing during these extraordinary and challenging times. Yet, Wie geht's also means, how does it work? With this podcast, we hope to share fresh ideas, learnings, stories, how we learn to rethink our practices and our role for societies. My guest today might not be very well known in Germany yet, but he ought to be. He's one of the most versatile, sharp, inspiring, entertaining and challenging artists that I know of. Seth Honor, director and joint lead of the production studio Collider. His work very often is collaborative and ranges from installation, live performance to digital, and has toured to festivals, venues and public spaces internationally. His production, The Money, was among the first West End productions in London to open after the long lockdown for theatres in the UK. The Money is a show game in which audience members have to reach an anonymous decision about how to spend a pot of real money. It has played on 5 continents and in venues as prestigious and charged as the UK Houses of Parliament, Sydney Opera House, Lagos City Hall, Yale Members Club, and Tianjin's Grand Theatre. We will be talking about his experience to bring this production back to London under COVID conditions, but also about other projects from the digital sphere and public spaces, and what connects the seemingly diverse work he has produced. As always, a biography as well as links to Seth Honor's projects can be found in the show notes and on our website. For an overview of all episodes which have been produced in English, among them conversations with the poet Wendy Cope, Tim Etchells from Force Entertainment and the researcher Orion Brook, please head to our English website www.covid-culture.com. I'm connected via Zoom with Seth Honor, the founder, artistic director, mastermind of the UK theatre performance group Collider. And I'm really excited to talk to you. I know some of your work and we've been in touch for a while now to arrange this interview. And now it can take place. We'll be talking about a production that took place during the pandemic in the West End of your, it's not a play actually. We'll talk about that more, but the production is called The Money. And we also be talking about a lot of digital stuff that you've been doing. But the first question that I always ask in this podcast would be, Wie geht's in German? And it's got a bit of a double meaning, but the opening question more or less is really the question, how are you, Seth? Thanks for being here. And how are you right now?
Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me. How am I? As someone asked me this the other day and I hadn't seen them for like 18 months or something. And I was like, what do you want to know? I'm a changed person like everybody else. I am not my best self, probably. I think it's fair to say. I think I am finding it hard to see the world, not being out in the world so much. And as an artist, I find that quite difficult because it's quite hard to read. And if you read the world off the internet, you get a very skewed idea of how everyone is, I think. I don't think it's a very real idea of how everyone is. And so my world has shrunk. So I am feeling very close to my family, which is lovely and wonderful. I'm very lucky to be where I live, which is this rather beautiful area of England on the edge of a national park, which is very rural. I think I'm doing a lot of, as everyone is, I think, of kind of trying to understand who they are and their place in the world right now.
Yeah, and that's more or less already the space that we explore in the conversation. I guess focusing on your artistic work. Although I haven't seen a lot of your work live. I've followed it for some time. I've seen the money, and I'm a huge admirer also of the variety of things that you do and produce, from really like things that rely on the physical space, on an experience which is just not just stage, but actually like draws in the audience and makes them participants and complicit in a way in what happens in the production, as in the money. And then you're also exploring topics of digital culture, artificial intelligence, learning systems. So it's really a vast area that your work covers. But before I try to explain what you do, to people who don't know the work that you do, don't know the work of Collider yet, and I guess in Germany you haven't been that present. You've traveled a lot of the world, but practically, I don't think the money, for example, has been shown in Germany yet.
No, we've never performed anything in Germany, actually.
It's really a shame. We should change that.
We'd love to come to Germany. We actually very, very nearly brought a project to Germany last year, but it was impossible in the end.
Yeah, due to the COVID, I guess.
Yeah.
But if you were to explain to somebody who doesn't know what Collider is about, what would be your take to introduce somebody to the work you do?
So we talk about Collider as a production studio, which is a very general term, of course. And then if people are like, well, what do you produce? We talk about art, but of course, the word art in English is often associated with visual art. And it's quite a multidisciplinary approach. So we combine installation and liveness and often, like you say, digital in artworks, often in public space, so often in spaces where people can come across them, or not in traditional spaces. So we play the money often in civic decision-making spaces rather than in theatres, but we have done it in theatres too. So we're quite playful with our audience. We often invite them to kind of complete the work or take part in the work in order for the experience to be complete or to be full. Without the audience, it wouldn't happen. So unlike, for example, a play that's on a stage where the audience can come, and of course they make a difference being there to the witness of the play. But if you remove them, you could still rehearse the play on that stage without an audience there, and it would be essentially the same piece of work. Mostly that's impossible with the work that we make. Mostly you have to have a level of participation, and it's not participatory in the sense of a kind of pantomime where we drag people up on stage. There's a genuine invitation in the work to be part of it, which means that there's also a genuine acceptance that not everyone has to be part of it. But we try to direct the invitation in such a way that those who choose not to be part of it still get to think about the kind of meaning and the challenges within the work.
Yeah, and I think probably like for these core aspects of your work, the money in a way really is the brilliant example of a production that really combines all that. And the money also was the first, or among the first productions in the West End to really open when it was possible to open theatre productions again at all last year actually this year, before this summer, due to the COVID situation. So before we talk about what it meant to do theatre and to do a production like that under COVID circumstances, the money has been around for quite a while before COVID as a production, and it's really, I experienced it once, and it was among the most depressing experiences maybe I had in theatre, but also among the most memorable and in its weird way the most positive ones also. So it's really hard to describe to somebody who hasn't been there what it can do to be part of the audience of that production. But again, in your own words,
it's a marketing nightmare when because
I know
someone came up to me once and said almost what you said. They said, "Oh my God," they swore at me basically. They said, "Oh my God, your effing show, it's like I'm still angry about it. It's like the best thing I've ever seen.
Exactly. I mean,
it has this duality of kind of excruciatingness, and it's really tricky to get people to say that they love it because they do. And they get very, like you've just said, it's kind of very attractive to people when they do it, but it's irksome as well. It's tricky, it's difficult, it's not straightforward. And I've seen it. I reckon I must have seen it. Well, I've seen it over 150 times now around the world. And sometimes it still gets me. I still squirm in my seat,
Yeah. It's really one of the few productions probably where I would really say anybody who has the chance to see it really has to go and see it. So I really would say I do love the experience. And as you said, it's so complex, and yet the basic idea is so simple. And how would you describe it to somebody who now probably is very irritated about what he has heard already in our conversation? How would you explain the basic idea of the money?
It is very straightforward. I mean, it's kind of deceptively simple as a concept, I guess. So we split the audience into two different categories. And when they buy a ticket, they choose to be either a player or a silent witness. Players have 1 hour to come to a unanimous decision about how to spend a pot of real money. If they agree in that hour unanimously, then they get to take that money away and spend it. So each show, we give a certain amount of money away, and if they agree unanimously, they get to go and do the thing that they've agreed to. If they don't agree unanimously, it rolls over to the next show, so they don't get the money. But the silent witnesses watching can, at any moment, convert from being a silent witness to being a player by ringing a bell, putting their money on the table, and then they become a player. And any players can at any moment become a silent witness or leave. So everyone in the auditorium is invited to leave at any point, including the silent witnesses. So there's this kind of always this invitation to extract yourself from the experience. The players can become silent witnesses by hitting a gong, and then they're out. And then they don't have to be part of the unanimous decision within the hour. There's a timer which times the hour. There are two female hosts which play a very, very important role. And they kind of bookend the experience. But within that hour, there is no intervention other than the hosts play a kind of umpiring role. The players are given the rules on the table to read themselves. So we hand an incredible amount of power over to the audience in the show. Like a very unusual amount of power, because there is no intervention in that hour. It is just the audience playing the game that we've constructed. And yes, the hosts sometimes have to umpire those rules, but basically we've set the system up so that it looks after itself.
Yeah, and I mean, the amazing thing being part of the audience is really you experience in this very condensed 60 minutes, in a way, a discourse and a debate about so many levels of what is important to us. How do we want to spend the money that we can spend? What does it mean to come up with a decision even as a group? How do we try and find ways of agreeing with each other or debating different ideas? How do we come up with ideas? So it's really amazing. There's so much going on in such a short amount of time, and it really gets to the very core, in a way, of our society and our feeling of being a community or not being a community. So it's really, really fascinating, and like I said, it can be really also frustrating because you really also all the challenges that we face as a community, as a society, even in a way as a global community, can get visible in a way in that moment. So it's really fascinating. Of course, everyone assumes that every evening is different. So you leave in a way and you would love to see it again and see how a different group performs. Maybe just to stay with the production for a short bit before we move on to what it meant to change it for COVID situation also. can you give 2 or 3 of your best liked examples of things that the money got spent on? So what is it that people manage to agree, if they manage to agree anonymously, to take the money and spend it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the money is that this is the story, and it is the first question that everyone asks is, so what do people spend the money on? Of course, what you're touching on is the show actually is, of course, the content of the show is much more about human nature than it is about money. Money is in a way the catalyst within the show that actually holds up human beings. And so there's a great tendency for people to do good, partly because they're being witnessed, of course, but also because people are good, generally speaking. That's always a surprise to people, which is fascinating to me, because I'm like, well, what world do you live in that's different to mine? Because I really consider people, and I'm not saying that they're somehow bad, but like, people are good, generally speaking. Even bad people are like, a very high percentage of them is actually good and they fit in the world. They just sometimes do bad things. It's like, and they're a very, very tiny minority. And we know that. And yet when we go to this show and see people being kind to each other and doing good and holding each other to account, somehow that feels surprising, which is interesting. So the content, the kind of illumination of the human condition, which is a sort of bold claim in a way, but I suppose that's what art does at its best for me. If it does that through this act of trying to come to agreement, not sort of almost despite whether they spend the money or not. For a long time, I'd watch the show and go, it's about what they spend the money on. I mean, for the first sort of 5 or 6 times we did it. And then I realized that it was the same show, whether they spent the money or not. So that it's literally the same content, whether they spend the money. Now, of course, when they do spend the money, it's kind of fantastic because it has this long tail. So to answer your question, there are some kind of, of course, there are all sorts. People have bought pots and pans for someone who had a learning disability and didn't have the ability to cook, so they bought them a cooker and pots and pans. And people talk a lot about planting trees, or people love to give away the money anonymously, which is fascinating to me. So they'll even, if someone says, well, I represent the group that you're giving it to, or I don't have any money or whatever, they're more likely to give it away to someone they don't know than they are to themselves. But my favorites are, I think one of my favorites, which I cite all the time, but it was sort of, you get these echoes come back because we don't track where the money's gone. But sometimes you get these echoes come back to you by someone who says, oh, you might be interested. This group spent the money on this. There was a show in America it was kind of a normal show. And then the silent witness brought in and said, I don't like anything you're talking about. I want to set up a charity that gives teddy bears to police officers so that they have something to give to children who are caught up in violent crime. And that's what got the money. And then a year later, I got a message, very short email, that was sent from the festival that had programmed it. And Connecticut police had emailed the festival, and it just had a picture of a child with a teddy bear. And it said, there was a terrible incident today, but luckily my police officers were armed with teddy bears from your project. So that echo is like, it makes you tingle, doesn't it? Like every time I say it out loud in an interview, I kind of go, oh yeah, that's got some power. And then, I could go on. There was a kind of in China they did a popularity contest. So the players got all of the silent witnesses after the hour. So this is what they agreed to. They agreed to hold a popularity contest of the players, having been on show for this hour. And then the silent witnesses voted for their favorite player, and that player got the money. And of course, the person who set up that system won the money. So
pure capitalism.
they just, they go on and on, they're really diverse. And in the Netherlands, they bought a boat together and they called the project Clean the Shitty. And the idea was that they could use the boat for leisure, but that they also had to clean the canals as they went. And that project still exists in the boat. They bought the boat by the weekend, and then these 26 strangers have this sort of timeshare in this boat, which is, a lot of joy, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and it's the great example is probably where you really leave also the production with this feeling like the world is a better place. And then there's the evenings like the one I experienced where people don't agree, and I completely share your description that at the core it's about this human condition, and this gets visible either way. And there were long moments when also the evening I was part of had the tendency, I think, for an agreement for something, but then it all fell apart in the past, in the last part of the production. But really, like the tragic thing, I think the frustrating thing, like I said, it wasn't about like the world is a bad place or people are bad, but it's more about how come that so many good intentioned people don't manage even on the small scale of this 1 hour to come to an agreement with each other. I think that was the bit that I found so frustrating. That there wasn't anybody really inherently in the role of the bad guy, and still good intentioned people didn't manage to come together. And I think that, of course, is also a condensed bit of something that we experience again and again in other moments in our life. That it's not the black and white, but it's the gray sphere where there is the potential for something good, and yet we don't manage to get there. And it's nobody individual's own fault, but it's really like this not managing to work together in a good way. And that was fascinating, but it was also really, really sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I think the show works because that's hard. It's hard to find shared values. And it's never, I mean, the amount of money doesn't appear to change the game or the show very much at all. Like even when there's more money, it still never seems to be enough. So in a way that doesn't actually change the show. It can be quite a small amount of money and you can still have a very exciting and interesting, engaged show. As I remember, that was in the Netherlands. Was it the one that you saw? Yeah, and someone actively said in that they game played it, as it were, and they said, "I'm not agreeing to anything." Is that right? They came in, and yeah, it's very interesting when people actively play the game. So sometimes people take it very seriously and sort of go, "Well, this is our task, and we're going to achieve it." And some people are able to step outside that and go, hang on, this is a show, this is a game, I'm going to play a role in this. And as I remember it in the show that you saw, someone stepped in and said, I'm actually not going to agree with anything that you decide. And they were then the adversary in the room. And in a way, it was those shows are often very unresolved for some people because they feel cross that someone has stood in the way of agreement. Yeah. But he also might have been giving a gift into the show. He might have been giving drama into the show, which made it more interesting. Or he may have also gone, you're not actually going to spend this on something very interesting. So it might be better to give it to a new group.
And I think that was part the point. I think like I said, it was about this playing the game as a game, but also the moment that person stepped in was when the majority of the group shifted from all the good cause in inverted commas to let's just spend it on beer tonight. Let's all invite everybody for a beer, and that was the point when that person stepped in and said, like, do you actually know that this kind of money that we're spending here really can make a difference somewhere else? And I'm not agreeing unless you give it to me. I think that was, and I'll spend it for a good cause, which of course that was then playing the game. That was really like exaggerating a lot of the structures that happened in the discourse before. But like I said, I think it really was a gift to the evening. It was much better to have that person stepping in than to just go and have a free beer afterwards, and probably like many people would have felt frustrated with that result as well.
There's a sort of inevitability in a way to people stepping in. I mean, it's very, very, very rare that you have no one buy in during the show. Like it has happened, but it's like super rare. Especially people sort of fall into the void. There's sort of inevitability that someone will step in, and it's. I love that about it, because the whole audience sort of doesn't somehow believe that until it happens, and then once it's happened, other people can come in, and I don't know. There's a lovely reveal about that for me in each show. For me too, will someone step in, and who will they be today, and what will they come with? And sometimes someone steps in, you go, they're gonna take this in a different direction, and they go, I just love the idea, I want to go with it. And you kind of do this thing where you go, oh, okay, so that hasn't really changed much. And then someone will step in and they'll do the same, and you'll be like, oh, okay. And then someone will step in and take it a different direction, and like, so there's this kind of, I don't know, there's this, you just don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know the rhythms of the show. I sort of know when people will buy in first and things like that, because I've seen it so many times. But every show has its reveal, and you can have one show in a day. You sometimes do 2 shows a day, and then when you do one show, just nice. Sometimes shows are like really nice, as in they're just pleasant, and there's not very much prickle in them, and they do a nice thing, and they're quite happy with their show. And then you'll have a show same day that's just like off the rails and difficult and complex and spiky, and you can't judge which show is going to be like that.
Yeah. Another thing, maybe like concluding this reflection on that show, and really the core message is to the German listeners in the art sphere: bring it to Germany and make it available for people to really experience it live. But one more thing I really found striking, just to mention that, is this differentiation between the players and the silent witnesses. And I was a silent witness and stayed in that role. But really have this ongoing reflection, of course, what's my responsibility here? And also these layers of, this is just a play and it's okay to be a witness, but then it's real money and it's a real conversation happening, and there's potential for a real follow-up. So isn't it my role also to like make a difference if I'm not agreeing to what's happening here? So this question of what does it mean to be part of something, and what happens if you've got the option to be more active, and what's the threshold you need to get more active? I also found that fascinating and really stressful in a way to like be constantly invited, and at the same time really being in charge yourself to make that decision on your own, whether you want to step in or not step in. So I think that also is genius to have these two roles and have everybody like being a free person to decide for the level of involvement that you want to take. So you can never really just sit back and say like, I'm just watching. You're, even as a silent witness, you're part of it, and that's really, I think, a great design also of the whole process.
We've played it sometime, like only once, I think, actually, thinking about it, but with this role of voyeur. So we have a third ticket type, which is who aren't able to buy in. So they're not able to convert. They can only watch. And which is probably the role that I play a lot of the time when I'm in the room, because once you can't watch from anywhere else really. So you have to be it's a sort of an immersive experience really. You're either in the room and in the show, or you're not. So when I'm watching it, I guess I'm playing that role too. But you see it in a different way because you're not implicated. So the silent witnesses have got this implication that they could step in at any time. So in a way, what you're saying, I think, Martin, is that you're actively refusing the invitation at all points.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's an active role. And it might be a good role. And there was this amazing show very, very early on, like 2013 or something, where the players had sort of dismissed the silent witnesses as going, well, they're not active, they're not doing anything. And someone brought in and gave this absolutely beautiful and incredibly powerful speech at the head of the table about the power of witness. And then she hit the gong and was out. But she was like, I am a witness and I am active, and I'm like super important. And it was beautiful. It's really beautiful. But yeah, I try to activate in all of my work. I try and ask a big enough question of the audience, so that even if they aren't accepting the invitation to step forward, they are at least holding the dilemma for a period of time.
Yeah, I love that expression of holding the dilemma. I want to take a look at the COVID situation in connected to the money. And like you said, you've been doing this many times in many different places in the world, and the majority of performances have happened before COVID. So in a way, you more or less had the challenge this summer to translate the setting into COVID compliant performance. And my question is for people also, again, who are probably not as familiar with the British situation right now. Theatres opened again more or less in late spring, I guess, this year.
17th of May, yeah.
And you really also, like, that's when you started practically. What is it that you had to change, and in a way, what did you learn, or what was the experience to do a production? And as we explored, it's not just putting something on a stage and opening an auditorium for people to come in, but it's actually a situation where it's really about social interaction. So what people probably also have been missing for a long time, but also have grown to be scared of, I guess, due to the pandemic. So what did you have to do in order to be able to actually do this under the current pandemic situation?
So there were lots of logistical things that we had to do, which was really difficult to think through, because obviously we have an auditorium where people are free to move around. They're free to talk across the table at each other. They can see each other because they're not wearing masks. So we had to have the audience in masks. We had to give them each a specific mask in order that they were audible, because cotton masks that they came with, they couldn't be heard through the microphones. You know, there's just enormous amount of logistics. We had to give them each a pen. Normally we would get the contract signed by each person, so that they weren't passing things between them too much. We gave them all sanitizer. We had to have more gongs so that people could gong out more easily without, and they had to be sanitized after anyone touched them. The bells had to be sanitized by the hosts each time. We introduced contactless payments so that people weren't using cash so much. So there was just an enormous amount of logistical stuff that we had to do, and to try not to break the show, because the show worked out. You kind of give the audience a freedom, I guess, within the rules. I mean, you give them rules in order to give them freedom, if you like. When I originally played it, the first time I tried it out, there were no rules. And of course, that's not freedom at all. That's just torture. So giving them some rules gives them freedom. But what we were trying to do in this situation was create an element of freedom at the same time as elements of control that kind of kept them safe. So they were socially distanced, which means that drains the energy out of your auditorium, because you've got your auditorium is a lot less than half full. And when it just brings a full auditorium for this show brings a different energy. There are always empty seats, because you have to have empty player seats in order for people to buy in, and you have to have empty silent witness seats in order for players to convert out. So it never looks totally full, an auditorium for this show, which always frustrates me, because it has a certain energy, a full auditorium, doesn't it? So that was, it was really tricky. And then when people convert to be players, they have to go through a certain process that they don't have the same freedoms as they would without COVID. And then, of course, the really big thing that you cannot control, and there's nothing you can do about, is that your subject matter is coming with a very different flow, psychological flow, than they ever have before. And they aren't, a little bit like I said when you asked me how I am, I don't think they know quite how they are in the world. So I don't think this is an unusual position right now to not quite know. You feel a bit unstable, as it were, in your sense of the world and your sense of your place in it. And if you're going into a show people are going into a room for the very first time for over a year with other people, let alone we played it in this extraordinary space, County Hall, which is a debating chamber, oak everywhere. It was the Greater Authority for London's debating chamber opposite Houses of Parliament on the Thames. It's a very grand space. So they're going into a very extraordinary space with a lot of strangers carrying a lot of fear, presumably. I mean, I think we all were. It'd be a bit odd if you weren't, in a way. So your subject matter is, the subjects of the show it's not like putting on a play where you can rehearse people up to the same acting that they were doing before. They're coming with very different baggage and very different ideas. So we put things into the script. So there's a script for the hosts. So we added certain things in about, we actually invited the audience to consider that the world we are living through extraordinary times. Please be careful of one another. So we added that in to kind of try and imbue it, just to kind of point our light, as it were, on the fact that they might be feeling this, without overdoing it. But it did feel a little bit, it felt more vulnerable, I think, as an experience than it probably ever has before. And of course, it's always got that about it. You're never quite sure how it's going to play out. But I think that everybody's resilience being down a bit meant that there's a sort of people's softness was nearer to the surface a lot of the time. And so we had a kind of duty to look after that in the show, which I hope, and I think we did, but it definitely changes the show.
Yeah. Something that many people from German theaters and performing arts spaces are experiencing right now is that it's extremely hard to invite people back in. Now you performed in a space that is not even like a common space, so people are not used that they're even able to see productions there, and then it's a production that is very special. And like you said,
it was a ridiculous
nightmare.
Idea, Martin.
I remember these little videos that you produced on social media to bring people in. Where exactly what we had in our first few minutes of our conversation, people said like, "I encourage everybody to go. It's so depressing."
Yeah.
So how did you manage to actually? I mean, in the moment when it starts, you described how you try to like support and hold the secure space, but the decision to come is made before that. So what was different in even like trying to invite people to bring people into making that commitment to go into a production after having watched Netflix for a year and a half on their sofa at home?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very pertinent question. It was very difficult. It was more difficult than we imagined it might be. I mean, this show is always, it's difficult to market because, like you say, people say it's difficult. It's the worst experience I've ever had and the best. And so it's difficult to sell that to people because they're like, what is this? Also, it's not like anything else. I mean, I learned that really clearly this summer. I mean, I sort of always knew it, but when you're trying to sell a kind of West End mainstream run, you really notice how different it is to anything else. And in a way, that was hard. It was really, really tricky to get people to come out. We had almost, I mean, it was like 3/4 of page 3 of the Saturday Guardian. That's like, we were the news. Basically. And I think that sold an additional 100 tickets or something. So it was really difficult, that aspect of it. Now, I mean, normally that would sell your show out, I would have thought. It's just not, it was a very positive article. It was very curious about the work. It was really, we got really loads of incoming from people interested in our work as about that. But yeah, it was really tough. And central London, it was empty. It had no tourists in it. It was a very low risk show because it's very compared to putting on Harry Potter, it's quite cheap to put on because it has 2 performers and almost no set. And but it was still very hard. Yeah, crazy even, I'd say. What were we thinking?
What would you say, what have you learned from this, and how do you look into the future of actually performing arts in the next months and probably even like years? It will still be an extraordinary situation in many ways. And again, looking from the outside from Germany, one of the most striking and again, actually depressing things that I saw that really was different in the UK or seemed to be different from the outside than what I experienced in Germany was that there was even this government campaign saying, if you're in the arts, why not take this moment to switch profession and do something sensible with your life, go into public health, whatever. It was so unthinkable in Germany to really take this moment to tell artists to stop being artists. This is the right moment to stop doing that. So what's your general outlook on the situation of the arts after this year and a half of really deep social cultural crisis, and how do you look into the future of your work and your profession right now? Is there some optimism around, or is it really just still a big crisis and insecurity?
Maybe both. I think I have 2 pieces of work that would maybe talk to this. One was that we were developing before the pandemic, which was about masculinity. It was a kind of game show for being the best man. Massively challenging subject matter, very, very playful approach to something that, I in doing it, I probably had to consider the safety of my family. I did. That's what, when we were developing it, I was like, should I be doing this? Should I be doing this? So it's really tricky. I will not do that show right now. I mean, I don't know. Certainly, it's off the table for now. It is just like stirring up a hornet's nest to do that show right now, and I don't personally have the resilience to hold. And I just don't think audiences want that right now. So then I'm developing this project, which is interesting because, of course, our programmers, our network wants that from me and from us a little bit. They want the challenge, and they kind of going, can't you do something? This is what's happening in the Netherlands with, politics. It looks like it's happening with yours too. Can you talk to us about that? And I'm like, well, no, I don't know the audiences. I think that's just rubbing their faces in it. So I'm developing this project at the moment, which is I make these fish mobiles that are like children's mobiles. So they just have paper fish on them, and they rotate. And I really, really love mobiles. I love the balance, and I love the animation, and I love their endless flow. And so we're talking about making an enormous one of these. So like with 10 or 15 meter long fish held in public space above people's heads, but that can be winched down into their space, their physical space, so that they can be next to these very large objects and touch them. But like, it's a very gentle, there isn't a politics here. I mean, of course, it has a nod to sea level rise, and it has a nod to the oceans, but it's not overtly a kind of political, there's not a kind of political message in here. It's just me trying to hold a space for people to be reflective and to go to their kids. Shall we go and see the fish today? Shall we go and be with the fish in the center of the city today? And programmers are kind of, I mean, I don't think we'll have a problem selling this work. I think that actually, I think it will be beautiful and people will really like it. But I'm definitely getting this slightly sideways look from programmers who we're used to programming with, who are going, what have you done with Seth? And for me, I think one of my very old teachers I saw recently, and she said, "Oh, you've just seen something maybe that others haven't quite seen yet." And maybe that's true. And maybe it's having done the Money in London. And people really enjoyed the Money in London. We had really, the audiences that came had a beautiful time and a difficult time. But I think there is space for reflection right now. And I just would like to hold a different kind of space for a moment that allows people back into the world a bit more gently than doing a game show about masculinity. Now, whether I'm right or not, I don't know. One of the challenges of this time for artists is that you can't see your audience very well. I mean, I've been lucky. I've had 3 shows out this summer, but two in, the Money. And then we have this project called Robot Selfie, which is an outdoor robot painting, crowdsourced project. That's explained it really clearly, hasn't it? And of course, I've seen audiences on the street as well as in theatres. So in a way, I've had the benefit of that. So maybe I'm saying that I think for the next year or so, we need to go gently back into the space of challenge and difficulty. And I don't know if that's cowardice or whether it's my own lack of resilience we have the project have a project idea, which is to hang an oak tree, a fully rooted, pulled up oak tree in public space, which is a kind of public hanging of a oak tree. I don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. I can see that it might be interesting. I can see that it will provoke conversation. I can see that it is it's sort of, as an artwork, I can see it's sort of good, and the newspapers would be horrified and interested. And I can see it's in the mold of the work that I've made previously. But I just don't want to do it. I want to hang some fish up.
I mean, what I really like about this approach, when you say like if it's cowardice or whatever the reasons behind it, what seems to be in it for me as one aspect is really this sense of relationship with the audience. So it's not about like I'm the artist and I put out there what I put out there and then it's in the world, but it's really about like thinking about it, even in the process of creation, thinking about it as something, as a relationship where what the state of the audience is right now, where they are, is as important as where you are, and there are similarities and differences, but what you create in a way also is already also reply to or reaction to or interaction with the state of society or the state of the audience. And I think that's something that might be part of what's special about the works, that actually you really feel spoken to when you interact with them, because you were already thought about in the process of creation. I don't know if that's that way for you, but it sounds to me a bit like it, that really there is this kind of interaction even in the process of creating or even thinking about potential projects already, which I think is something quite special.
Yeah, it's interesting because all my career, people are kind of, people who are being helpful say to you, but who's the audience or whatever? And I never really understand that question. But you're quite right. Maybe I don't understand it because the work just doesn't work unless I read the audience correctly. Like, maybe that's the case for all artists, but I don't feel that with, I do see some work and I've thought, well, who's that connecting with? Or are you just kind of outwardly broadcasting? And I try not to broadcast. I try and invite inquiry and I try and ask questions. I think for me, good artworks ask good questions, I guess. Is that what I mean? Yeah, I think they allow you to return to them. Like even a great painting, it asks something of you. if it doesn't ask anything of you, it's just a poster in a hotel room. It's just decoration. Whereas I think if you can return to it and keep inquiring about the world through it, or it gives you some meditation, then I think that's important. So I guess maybe I don't understand that question, because it's like the audience, it's like a non-question for me. The audience are always the center. And if I misread them, like in the money, if I misread what people will do in that show, then the show breaks. So I have to be like, I'm not a magician, but I think magicians are amazing and clever technically, in awe of them. But I often think of it as magic. If I say think of a vegetable, I have to know that you're going to think of carrot. And then like 9 times out of 10, that's what you're going to think of in order to make the magic trick work. And that's the skill. And for me, that's my skill, is knowing what the audience is going to do, or like risk assessing what the audience is going to do. So even simple work, we have this project called Pig, which is a big plastic pig that goes in public space. It's also been around a lot of Western Europe, but not Germany. And it invites the audience to put money in it through a sign, and it invites them to undo the 50 nuts and bolts around its perimeter and take the lid off and take the money out when they've come to an agreement. So it's like a kind of version of the money, but in public space. And it's kind of madness, isn't it, to put money in the middle of the street like that? But it is definitely very interesting as well as kind of madness. And yeah, I suppose when I did that, people were like, what about the audiences? Are you going to look after the audiences? And in a way, I have to build, because there's no host in that. Although when we're doing it for COVID times, so we were actually built in a kind of hosting role, but everything has to be in the system. It's very simple. It's a plastic pig with a sign. Every single word in the sign is very, very important. It's not a long sentence, but it's vital. The speed at which people read it is vital in order that their system doesn't break when you put it in public space and give it to people to play with. They have to understand exactly the parameters of it. So you kind of have to really, really look after your audience, even though you're sort of not holding their hand. You're entrusting them, I suppose. You're giving a lot of power away. And that, my experience of talking to other people, is that really scares them.
Yeah, and I think there's to me, it seems now, listening to you, that there's two very different kinds of ways of asking the question, who is the audience? Because there's the marketing question, which is more about like, who are we going to sell this to? And then it's really about like, who is this having a relationship with, or who are the people who will respond to that question? And I think in that respect, you're not answering that question in marketing terms with social demographics, but it's more about like really forming this kind of connection, or making that this kind of invitation.
Marketing is really interesting for me, because when I started Collider, we put out a commission call, and what we said was we want the marketing to be built into the show. And to some extent, that never happened. But over the period of Collider, what we established was this term interruptive gift. So if I'm going to get your attention or anyone's attention, I have to interrupt you. Basically, you're busy. You've got stuff to be doing. If you're walking down the street, you're going somewhere, you're there for a reason. You've determined that reason. You're not just mine. You're yours, and I have to respect that. And so the reason I talk about interruption, not disruption, is because I've literally got to get your attention. And that is by all sorts of things, but it might be by putting a big transparent plastic pig in your way, at which you go, oh, there's a big transparent plastic pig. At that point, I'm going to have to give you something. Because if I don't give you something, I have literally just stood in your way. I've just stopped your flow. So there's a kind of, yes, I'm interrupting you. And then we talk about creating interruptive gifts. So you have to give, you have to follow up that interruption with something. And it may not be like the gift that, it's not an iPhone, but it's like it's the gift of a moment. And I was talking, it's kind of slightly pretentious, but I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was saying, oh, I know, I sent him a Fish Mobile, which is a kind of kit where he completes the little Fish Mobile with the paper or whatever. And so I don't send him a complete one. I send him the kit with the instructions and he completes it. And he'd cut out the spare bits and made them into different sea creatures and hung them. And he was like, look what I've made it better. And I was like, oh no, that's the point. And he was like, oh, damn it. Like, you've got me. And he's like, oh, you've like, he felt tripped up because he'd done this thing. And I'd gone, no, I wasn't tripping you up in a way that like I wanted you to fall. And then I was like, well, actually, no, I do trip people up. That I am literally tripping people up. Not literally. I am tripping people up, metaphorically. But before they hit the ground, and it sounds really pretentious, but before they hit the ground, I want to give them wings so that they're falling. They fall, and then they're like, oh, wait, I'm not where I expected to be. And in that place, I think audiences like can transform. I think they can move in that place. They're not passive. They're not standing on their own 2 feet anymore, where they're comfortable and confident, but you're still looking after them. You've still given them the wings. It's not like you've just let them fall flat on their face. Yeah, I think I moved from going, I don't trip people up, to going, oh no, I think I probably do, but I don't let them hit the floor. As you know, I mean, sometimes it will go wrong, and then they will. But like on the whole, I try very, very hard for them not to hurt themselves emotionally or anything else.
I think what is really, again, it's special about your work in a way to me, and gets visible also in what you've been describing. And this is probably like the last bit of our conversation for today, or already approaching the end, is that there's a lot of things that connect the works you do. And I think we talked about them, but it's not the medium that connects them. So you're pursuing these questions, you're pursuing this kind of relationship, creating spaces for the audiences or for communities, and you do that in all kinds of ways with productions that happen in performing arts spaces, with things that happen in the public sphere, with heavy use of digital media. You mentioned the robot AI selfie project that's going on, I think right now also. And then with like really analog, as you'd say today, productions that actually rely on a physical space and human beings being in there together, and no digital media whatsoever. So what I really find interesting is how do you come to the form of the work? It seems you're starting with an interest in a topic, or an interest in a question, an interest in a challenge, and then the form really follows. Whereas in Germany, the discourse right now, especially about digital technology, is very much that either you're a specialist for digital and then you're expected to do digital projects, or you're a specialist for classical traditional works and then you're doing the traditional stuff. But that somebody really chooses the medium, chooses the technology based on an interest lying elsewhere seems to be very special. And in Germany, the debate is very much about like, can you translate a theater play by streaming it into the digital sphere? And it seems to be that you're much beyond that discourse already, and you're really using it as just one option among many options, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So what's your relation to form in your work, and specifically to the digital forms and technologies?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think you're right. I do treat digital as just a part of the palette from which to draw, to paint. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I guess I don't see any barrier to form. It's like, I don't know. With the Fish Mobile, I look at a small Fish Mobile and go, wouldn't that be amazing if that was really big? because it would interrupt people and it would give them something, I guess. And we came to Pig because I was having a conversation with Alice Tatton Brown, who was the host for The Money and helped make it originally. And she was saying, how could we put this on the street? Because, how could we get people to not have to buy a ticket? Should we put a table with money in it? And I was like, it's hard enough to get people to come to the show anyway without like putting it out in the open. We should just put a plastic pig in the street. And then I was like, oh, maybe we should just put a plastic pig in the street. It's like that. The ideas kind of come out of dialogue with people and the people around me. And, they come and you go, oh, wouldn't it be good if? So maybe it's just a kind of freedom of not. And also finding where people are, where are they going to meet this work? That often dictates the form. Where are people going to be? Are they going to be at home? So we have a version of Robot Selfie, the project you just talked about, which is where the audience submit. We have an AI which draws them online, so they can do that from anywhere in the world, and then they can submit that to us, and a painting robot with a spray can sprays that image amongst everybody else's portraits on a massive canvas in public space in real time. And then we have an indoor version of that called Portrait Without Borders, where people use the same interface and they can send their image from anywhere in the world. And in an empty space somewhere in the world, we have indoor robots that draw people's pictures as a mural. And we were able to do that. And so I guess that for me, that was a response to, we developed that really rapidly last summer because people had those devices in their pockets in their homes, and that's where they were, and that's how they could experience it. And we had ample empty spaces in the world that normally were filled with people. So we were able to do it in big theatres in the UK, and then we just did it in Milan recently, and we're taking it to Vermont to a theatre that's not yet open and will be opening. So in its lead up to the opening, we're taking it there. So I guess that you just use the form that fits the idea. I'm like any artist, I'm kind of opportunistic. I go, what could we do that would fit the world right now? Capitalism would consider it that a market opportunity, and I think artists see it as a kind of it's not dissimilar. They see it as an opportunity to play. How can I play and engage people in thinking at this point?
Yeah, I really think one of the thoughts that I'll take from our conversation is there needs to be some kind of retrospective of the work being arranged in Hamburg or Berlin or some place that we can really make this accessible for many people. I think for today we need to come to an end of our conversation. It'd be great to continue this. I'd love to know more about the process of your work actually and talk about that. I'd also love to talk some more about your view on what these digital media do to our more general social future, and how you see that also as an artist, the changes that we're going through even beyond COVID and even before COVID. And maybe we can do that at a later moment. We do have these continued conversations on the podcast, so you're definitely invited to return if you like. For today, my final question that I always ask in the first conversation is the question of where do you find inspiration? And of course, one of the reasons to ask this question was in the times of lockdowns, many people felt it particularly hard, even though some had the fantasy, if I had time at my hands, I would read these books or I would listen to this kind of music. And then when they were locked down at home, it didn't feel inspirational at all. Now things are slowly opening up more. Where do you find inspiration at this moment in time?
Yeah, it's hard. It's like you just said, is the answer. I mean, from the people around me, from my team at Collider, from the programmers who we're in dialogue with. I'm very lucky to be part of In Situ, which is a European platform for work in public space and network of artists and programmers. So that's a great area for kind of dialogue about what we should make, because you have a good they're a good litmus paper for where the world's at in terms of audiences and programming. But it's really hard. I think it's really difficult. I don't read loads of books. I don't culturally consume massively. I never have particularly. And I think I make my work through sort of observation, sort of looking on a little bit. And I find that very difficult in these times. I'm looking forward to mechanisms by which I can see the world again a little bit more clearly.
Thank you very much for talking about and reflecting about this experience for today's conversation. And I really hope that we can continue it at some later point. Thanks a lot, Seth.
Thanks ever so much, Martin. It's been great to have your curiosity. It's always a total privilege when people are curious about your work. So thank you.
You're really, really welcome. Thanks. This was the 80th edition of our podcast, Wie geht's? The Cultural Sphere during the coronavirus crisis. To celebrate this little anniversary, I will be producing the next 3 episodes live with an audience on October 24th at the grand opening weekend for our new campus in Hamburg. Amelie Deufelhardt, the artistic director of Hamburg's Kampnagel production space, will be among my guests then. I look forward to these next episodes. Until then, take care. Passen Sie gut auf sich auf.